morning. I'd like to welcome you all to a program that's organized by the Michener Art Museum that celebrates the work of Daniel Garber, one of our beloved artists, a Pennsylvania landscape painter whose work is prominently featured in our museum. You all know the signature piece, the Wooded Watershed mural. Well, today we're sitting in what was the studio of Daniel Garber, which is situated so beautifully on site here in the property that he lived in with his family, that he built almost by hand, the landscape that he celebrated in his artwork. And we're very fortunate to hear stories from a family member today, his granddaughter, Daniel Garber Applestein. She studied with him. She studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And we're very lucky to hear the stories that bring the artist to life. I did want to thank and recognize Suzanne and Bromley Lowe, first off. It is their property. It is their home now. They have so beautifully taken care of it for about 30 years. It is currently on the market, but it's through their generosity that we've been able to come here for about the last 6 or 7 years and enjoy the property.
Has everyone been to the Michener? Yes. Did any of you go to the show in '07, which was the big retrospective? Oh, good, good. So sometimes people haven't, and then I don't know what to talk about. So this, I kind of freewheel here, and I will tend to go down a road and then remember something and end up over here. And I rely on, well, I have 3 plants in the audience who can bring me back, but I also depend on you, and ask questions too, because I probably won't know the answers, but I can make up something. And if you ask me specifics, like about what year did he go to the Pennsylvania Academy, I might make that up. I don't know. I don't know much about the statistics. I just know about the feeling of the place. This whole building was the studio. It was exactly the same footprint of his studio. This part was the art studio. This other room, which has now been beautifully renovated, used to be the shop. He called it the shop because he fixed everything there. He did not throw out anything. My father inherited that trait, and I inherited that trait. My husband's going nuts. I just can't, because as soon as you throw something out 2 weeks later, you will absolutely know you had to have it. So that shop had everything but the kitchen sink in it, even things hanging from the ceiling. I remember a spinning wheel. I can remember other things hanging from the ceiling, and one additional piece, which was fabulous. Are any of you art students, or the jointed models like of a hand with the joints, or the small models of dolls that will make, you can move their arm? Okay. He had a full-size, mannequin-size one in there, just a plain wood-colored dummy. And somewhere he found a pink chiffon negligee with big marabou feathers like Ginger Rogers sleeves on it, and they would put that over her, and it called her Zelda. And, but she was used for long poses. You know, I mean, my grandmother was primarily, for many, many years, his model when he was doing paintings that are called for, you know, interior scenes or something. And then she couldn't just, I mean, she was a housewife, and so she couldn't just sit there for hours, but he would use Zelda. And likewise, when we talk about this painting, this is the studio wall painting. It was painted right here against this wall. All of the things that are in the room are not original to the studio. Of course, this place has been owned several times since we had it. In fact, it took me about 20 years after we sold the house for me to even drive down this road, because they had altered the house itself. It was a stucco over stone, and it had ivy growing all over it. All the buildings were just ivy covered, which is leading to how he died, but we'll get to that later. And the studio had these 2 windows from in this room. The 2 flanking windows did not exist. They were on the outside. There's a photograph back there, I think I brought it, of a photo of the outside of the building, and you can see 2 windows, but he had them completely blocked and cemented over, plastered over. And then that double door, French door, had a very heavy dark green wool fabric on it to block the light. So this was the light reason for doing that. That window, see the painting up there? It's called Orchard Window. There was no orchard out there, but I think he liked the name. I think he liked the word orchard. So anyway, that was painted right where Gilbert's sitting. And also, I also want to thank Gilbert and Zoriana. Gilbert Winter is another staff member of the Michener, and he has come. This is his day off. And he has come to every one of these and is the biggest help. And he's one of my plants. The other one is Zoriana, and the other one is Rosemary, who's sitting right here. Anyway, and then of course this window had shears on it, just to cut down the force of the light. This window was used in a painting also. That was an orchard window. This painting, Tanis, which I hope you've all seen, it's very large, was painted outside this door. And we had, in our time, a grape arbor that ran all the way down here, and late summer, the grapes would all fall and they'd squish, and you'd have bees everywhere, and you just get stung going into the house. But you can see the grapevines, or the grape leaves on the upper right-hand corner. I don't think the rhododendron was there, but he stuck it in just because he needed something in that corner. These are doors that open, and there was a painting called Mother and Son, which is now owned by the Pennsylvania Academy. And it's my father standing in the open doorway, and my grandmother sitting at a chess table. Chess was a big sport in this family. And then it was, of course, the landscape outside the window, which was very poetic. My father was not used in many paintings, because he was a guy, I guess, and Aunt Tanis was prettier. But it's a lovely thing, and every time I see it, I think that's my dad. But anyway, so this is the physical plant. I started to tell you that these windows were blocked off. And so there was nothing on this wall, which is why Studio Wall was painted there. She could stand there. And the trick was, he had screwed into the ceiling a bolt with a string on it. And the vase was just hung there so that she could put her arms down and then put them back up. And actually, it's a lot smaller in real life. My sister has it, unfortunately. Had a very large easel in here. Between the door and the window was the etching press. And it was a large, his personal desk was at that end against that wall. And he kept his ledgers in there. He was very meticulous, and it was still difficult at the time they were gathering information for the catalog raisonné, which took 20 years. It was still difficult, even though he kept a register of everything. As he got older, he started failing and didn't keep his the records up as well as he could have. And my father tried to pick up with that, and then also couldn't track. You need to have somebody who knows what they're doing to track these things. But to his credit, he knew that he needed to have a register of everything and where it went so that it could start the provenance rolling. He was born in Indiana on a dairy farm, and he was the youngest child of 16 children. Not the same mother each time. Yeah, I know, I had 7. Well, in those days, it was a dairy farm, and it was very hard for women. We don't have the medical experiences we do now. So childbirth or just hard work. First wife died. I have no idea how many children. Then the second wife, and then she died. I don't know how many children. I mean, I don't know who had how many. There were 16 in all. And then the third wife had 2, and Gramps was the youngest. They were Dunkers, which is sort of like Mennonite or Amish, and so they were plain folk. What astonishes me is that a Dunkard farmer in the 1800s would understand and recognize that his youngest baby was not suited for this and that he had a talent. Because, and I just remember this from my father telling me this, he had rented a small house near the farm as a studio for this kid when he was about 12. He did that for me, but anyway. So I think Gramps really somehow, by osmosis, found this part of himself. And I'm assuming with plain folk that there weren't paintings on the walls with gold frames. You know, I mean, it may have been painted dower chests and the frock-tur birth announcements and things like that, but not any art experience, and yet here it was. So Gramps, I think, kind of appealed persistently to his father that he wanted to study art. And my sister and I each have, you know how things are handed down, and probably everything I'm telling you today, someday later they're all going to say that's not true. But my sister and I have kind of a variation on what might have happened. Of course, I'm a dreamer. His father said, oh, I want you to go to art school. But my sister thinks that, and she's probably right, that Gramps wanted to go so badly and his father was resistant to let him go. He was young, he was very young. And I don't think he wanted him to help milk cows, but he just didn't want his baby to leave. And an older brother said to him, if you don't let him go, you will lose him. And so the father gave permission, and he instantly applied to the University of Chicago, or the Chicago Art Institute, and the Cincinnati Art School. Cincinnati answered first. He got that reply and acceptance and just was gone. He didn't want to wait in case his grandfather, be my great-grandfather, changed his mind. So he went. He went to Cincinnati, and he was there for a couple of years, and he studied with Frank Duveneck and some other luminaries from the Cincinnati area, and they said, we're finished. You need to go on. So they pushed him to the Pennsylvania Academy, which he arrived there in his teens, later teens, and hit the ground running. I don't know what to say. He was a marvel, and I will say that he was very successful in his own time, which is unusual. Many artists struggle, and you hear about the Garrett, you know, and Van Gogh himself, poor guy, who knew, you know, later he was, I hope he's looking down from up there, because it would be nice to know that these fellows realized that what the world, you know, came to believe and understand of their work. Anyway, I'm digressing. He was at the Academy for a few years, and while he was there, he met a girl named Mary Franklin. And she was a student of Howard Pyle as an illustrator. And she did beautiful, fine pen and ink detail work. I think I inherited her genes because I blew my hand out doing tiny little. I'm just recovering from a whole hand reconstruction. So, yeah. Anyway, so it's not about me. Gramps met her and they fell in love, and then the Academy, in its beneficence, awarded him 2 Crescent. It's called a Crescent Award. It's, first of all, a gold medal, and then it is also a paid trip to Europe to paint. Wow. And he won 3 years of painting in Europe. Wow. So they married and went off together to you know, a free 3-year paid European vacation. Well, anyway, my Aunt Tanis was born in Paris. And I think in those days, can you believe it? No cell phone, no internet. Grandma, I think, was very, very homesick because she has this baby now and nobody to say, look how cute the baby is. So she got my grandfather to come back to the country, and he came back, story is, with 50 cents in his pocket after they got off the ship. But he had a job waiting for him to teach painting and drawing at the Academy. So they moved into Philadelphia on Green Street, which the building now is a parking lot. Not a great section of town. At any rate, for the first few years, my father was born there in Philadelphia, and as the family was starting to get growing, Mary Franklin's father bought this property for them You were not able to live in it. I mean, you wouldn't bring 2 children here at that point because there was nothing. There was no running water, there was no anything. Fortunately, because he had a paying job and he was painting and selling, and he did it himself. He didn't particularly like dealers. And I think some of that has rubbed off on us. If we sell something, it's a one-time thing only. And it may be by auction or it may be with a dealer, but he had never put all of his paintings in the custody of someone to promote him. He did that himself. So there was this son of an Indiana dairy farmer who at a very early age, in the 1800s, was off and learning and studying, became a successful painter, and also had a great business sense. This is probably why he did so well. This is all out of my head, you know, this is my imagination because I've grown up with this, and this is the story that as I understand it. To have a business sense about how to market yourself, as well as have this enormous talent, is a winning combination. Many, many, many artists are so gifted, but don't know how to make that leap. Hence, dealers were born. Lots of fine dealers out there, but there are also some extremely unscrupulous ones. Because it's money. A lot of money involved in this kind of thing. So, while the family was in Philadelphia, when he had vacation time, they stayed there. And he rented a tiny little house on the river. It's right on the river. It's still there. It has never been hit by flood because it's so high up. But I mean, out the door, and if you were to go 20 feet, you'd be swimming. It's on the river. Of course, he loved the river. He painted the river over and over and over again. So he would come out here and paint while the family stayed in the city, and then also had construction done to the house, and he did quite a bit to it before he moved his family here. I want to talk a little bit about his attitude toward art, toward painting, toward other painters. He was 2 people in my head. He was my grandfather, who was very noisy, very boisterous, some of you have heard this over and over and over again. I'd like to make up something for Rosemary, but I can't, I have to be honest. He was a man who looked a little like Jimmy Cagney to me. You picture Jimmy Cagney, kind of stout but very agile, and Gramps was like that. I can remember him he wore knee socks and knickers, and he painted in a shirt and tie, wore armbands on his sleeves to keep his cuffs out of the paint, and he was that meticulous. I paint, and I have a big apron, and my husband's a physician at Doylestown Hospital, and he gave me some of his old white coats, and they would stand up by themselves with the amount of paint that's on them. So he was 2 people. He was this really happy, loved his family. I can't remember my father ever coming here or leaving here without being hugged and kissed, which my father didn't do. You know, isn't it funny how people don't follow through? Well, anyway, Gramps was a loving grandfather and dad, adored his family. And if you can look at that painting and not see love in that, see how he cherished this child. But on the other hand, if you got him into the academy classroom, or to a child who was his only grandchild who ever studied art with him, he was another person. He was. At the academy, there were stories, and they are true, about his treatment of students that he didn't think were serious, or particularly women who he thought were just attending classes until these are his words, not mine, until they found a husband. And and this will give the whole picture to you, one girl was painting in his painting class. He came up to her, not just, the whole room could hear this, and he said, "Can you cook?" And I've got to tell the truth here. Can you cook? And she said no. And he said, well, you'd better learn because you can't paint. And when I was 14 and I knew these stories, my parents dropped me off here in the summer and took my sister down to horse country because she was horse crazy, and they said, you're going to study with your grandfather. And I went, oh, no. It was the best thing that ever happened, and I wish I could have realized more about that time. But I was mostly frightened. Not of the guy in the house, but the guy out here. When I was little, and my parents would take me anywhere, as long as I had a pencil and paper, I would be happy for 2 hours. I wouldn't cry or whine. I just loved to make things happen on a piece of paper. And I still like that. Years ago when I was a kid, remember the early TV, there was a John Nagy who painted in a half-hour show, and he'd like paint 10 paintings in a half an hour. And he'd take a palette knife and go chunk, 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 and there would be a row of pine trees. Well, I just loved watching that happen. I think that was my nature as a child, and my parents thought, oh, well, she should have art lessons. Well, I came up here, they drove away, I was seeing taillights go down the road, and the next morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, there was a chair here with a drawing board on it with some paper thumbtacked, and he gave me his very good French press paper. He didn't give me just some old newsprint. This was a very fine piece of drawing paper and a little box of charcoal and a razor blade and an art gun. The reason I mentioned that about the good quality paper, because people will say, my child likes to draw and I would like to give him art lessons. Where should I send him? And I say, send him to the art store. Buy him extraordinarily good paper and very good pens or pencils rather, and high quality things, because as they work on that, the results are going to be better. They're going to be more pleased with their outcome and want to do more. If you just give them crayons and a block of newsprint, forget it, just enter them in soccer, because it makes a difference. So anyway, he sat me down, and on a table, there was a bench here against the wall, on a table there was the ugliest sculpture you've ever seen, and my sister has it. And it was done by Albert Leslie. See, I got his name right. Albert Leslie. Last week I couldn't think of his name, which happens. So Albert Leslie is a well-known sculptor of animals, and he had put together, and I think my cousin Francis had it. It was a sculpture called Chanticleer, which is a beautiful bird with the arched neck, and I mean, when I say beautiful, it was beautifully done, but it showed the proud nature of this bird. It was wonderful. But what I was going to draw was one of his mock-ups for that, which was just, in a sculpture studio, if you're working with clay, you bang on the clay in chunks onto a form, and then, and that's your base. And this is what I was going to draw. And I thought, what about pansies or, flowers? And but I wouldn't even suggest that to him because I didn't want to ruffle the waters or make them mad at me. So I said, draw that and I'll be back in an hour. And I'm telling you this not about me, but about the amount of panic that he as a teacher could set up in someone. Of course I was 14, so it's probably amplified, but I took the first piece of charcoal and took the razor blade, and it was this long. When I had it down to a reasonable point, I could barely hold it in my fingers, so then I got another piece of charcoal. So I wasted about 10 to 15 minutes trying to get something that I could, because charcoal, if you're going to draw a fine line, see, I grew up with him. These are his actual etchings. So I grew up seeing all that wonderful tiny detail. So I wanted a fine line. Well, so I tried to draw this thing and spent the next 45 minutes. He comes in here and I stood up. He sat down. I'm looking at a camera. Don't do that. But that went at it, and then he would draw on my drawing. So, and that's, if any of you have studied art or have tried to do something and then someone comes and draws on top of it, even though it was this ugly chicken that I didn't want and I was going to throw away when I was finished with it, it still was my drawing and he drew over it. So he took it down, saved me the trouble of throwing it out, put another piece of paper up and said, do it again. This is his method. This is the Daniel Garber method of instruction. Don't tell the child how, just have them do it, and then I'll come in and write all over it. So this process went on for I don't know how long. I mean, in my head now, I'm in my 70s, it was probably only several weeks, but to me it seemed like the whole summer. So I really don't remember, but it was morning, afternoon, draw, 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 draw. And the things got better. I mean, the items that I was to look at were much more appealing, but to start me off with that, oof. Anyway, then one day I came out here and he said, you're going to go paint. Same thing. Here's a little French easel, basic oil paints, and a masonite panel, which was tinted, and all his canvases were tinted, never painted on white. He would mix ultramarine blue and raw umber and a wash of turpentine and just tone his canvases with that. Made a lovely gray. And so anyway, he said, go out there and pick a site and I'll be back. I'll be around in an hour. I guess that's all his watch was. It was like an hour. And so I went out and I was going to go from over there looking at the house, and I'm sitting on the lawn, picked up a tube of cadmium green deep, and held it up to the grass, and it was the same color. So I painted the foreground with cadmium green. The sky was like today, had a cerulean blue, as I could tell, so I painted the sky. Started going, and he came in an hour and sat down, took a palette knife and scraped the whole thing off. Then he took a little yellow ochre, a little blue, a little this, and he dabbed it in the foreground and dabbed a little bit in the sky. And then he did this, and then he just kind of made all these messes, which if you looked at them on the palette, they weren't really appealing colors. But he started feeding the canvas these little bits of color, and all of a sudden it just came right out at you. It was brilliant. And I learned more by watching, by trying that myself and having him say, try this, or this is how I do it. It was an incredible experience. And by the next year I was into boys, and I wish now I'd begged to come up here, but by then he was very, very ill and couldn't manage. Another thing about this room is this doorway, which had the green, I want to pass around some pictures too, to show you, right here. Oh, okay. I love this one. That's him. That's how I remember him. He's down at the academy. The gal in the background is probably one of the, they were hanging a jury show, and she was probably one of the students who was helping hang, but somebody told him to look at the camera, and so that's very typical of him, and I love that. It was a tiny little photo, and I blew it up on the computer, so it's kind of grainy, but the other thing, so just you know, circle them around. Here are two photographs printed on the computer that my son took at the time of the Academy exhibition. These were both in the drawings section, but these are charcoal drawings, and I will tell you that charcoal is the absolute worst, most difficult medium you could possibly. Those are two examples of his charcoal drawing. Every student that starts at the Academy, and I assume it's still the same way because I'm a remedial Pennsylvania Academy student. I went, I got married, I had children, And I went again. I mean, it was self-defense. My husband said, you have to get out of here. You have to go paint because we're going to kill all these children. So I went back to the academy. My sister also went to the academy, but many years later. She saw what I went through trying to paint, and our parents were not very encouraging. My mom and dad did not put drawings on the refrigerator door, ever. More often, my dad would criticize, so I ended up never showing them what I did. And also, I think it influenced me to try to be more like Gramps, and I'm not him, but I finally learned that about 6 months ago. This window, this is a painting called Mending, and outside that railing was a weeping willow, been gone for years. This looks like it's on some giant porch, but it's really her sitting on that railing. And the subject matter, even though it's called Mending, is the light in the leaves. The subject matter is how the light shimmers. And honestly, that painting I have heard about. I heard about for many years, never saw it. It was privately owned. And at some point, the people died, and then their children had it, and then they died, I guess. And anyway, it came up for auction. And it was right after my father had died when this came up for auction. And I'll get into auction prices in a little. I don't want to tell you that story yet. But at any rate, it was painted there, and it was on that rail, on that balcony. One day, July 5th, 1958, my father was on a ladder trimming ivy away from the building, which was a constant thing going on here. And Gramps was on the balcony trimming ivy, and they were talking to each other. My sister had been down at the swimming pool. There's a natural rock pool that my aunt built herself. She lived here with her parents after her marriage went south and her kids were grown. She kind of maintained the property, which neither of my grandparents could do anymore. We had sheep with the lawnmowers, and he had this looking as natural and untouched by human hands as possible. Well, anyway, so she'd gone down there. She was 13, and she passed coming up to the house and waved to them. And as she got up onto where the arbors are, the grape arbors, she heard a crack. And the railing gave, and he fell to the driveway, and that was it. Fortunately, because I would say 4 to 6 years before, he'd had his first heart attack. They took him to Doylestown Hospital. It's I think the Greenleaf Nursing Home now. I'm not sure which. Yeah, but it was right in Doylestown, big old building, and that was the Doylestown Hospital, and it was full. So he ended up on a gurney before he could be admitted, and it was in a hallway on a gurney. And in the hallway, how banks and hospitals, they have amateur art or paintings on the walls. Very nice. They had to take the paintings down. His heart was like, he couldn't stand lying there and looking at bad paintings. I'm telling you, this is getting around to, he was a snob. Great grandfather, great person, horrible, tough teacher. His methods were harsh, and he could not tolerate what he considered bad art. And to be forced to lie there, they had to take things on. They thought he was going to have another heart attack. So that gives you a little of what the rest of the world had to deal with. Gramps is not an Impressionist. This is not Impressionist painting. He was lumped in with them, and they still call him that. And he's referred to as member of the New Hope Impressionist School. He was not, nobody has a title for his type of painting. The closest I can think of would be the French Pointillist.
Seurat.
Yes, Seurat. And yet not at all. Polar opposites, and yet his method of applying paint with tiny dots of color is similar to that technique. His paintings took at least, well, this is from his mouth to my ears to your ears, of about 3 weeks for one of the large paintings, from first application of paint to completion. that may be spread over 4 or 5 years. He would take his canvases, some of them very large, and he had a pickup truck with big wooden railings attached to the side, and he would strap the canvases to the truck, and off he'd go. He actually drove a mail truck off the road. He was horrible driving, and he was always, you know, looking at scenery, and he'd blink his, when I do that, that's how he would look at something. He would say, squint your eyes. And I would drive with him that summer when we weren't working or doing something. He wasn't teaching me. I would get in the car with him if he had to go get the mail or go shopping. And he would just drive along and say, look over there, squint your eyes and tell me what you see. Watch the road. And, but I think angels were riding on his hood. There were times, I told you, that he would sell his paintings himself. When he first came back from Europe and began painting it, he painted many very large canvases because he would enter them in exhibitions for prize money or for awards to get his name recognized. I think he must have been painting constantly because, well, his family was in Philadelphia, because he turned out a lot of these big canvases, and they'd be put into big crates with an address on it, and then a forwarding address, then another forwarding address, and that canvas would go from New Mexico to Colorado to Pittsburgh and around, and it might be a couple of years before he'd see it again. That's one of the ways that he became known. In those days, we didn't have print media as we do today. If you go to a museum today, you can pretty much get a poster about anything they've got hanging on their walls within reason. In those days, if you wanted to see the work of an artist, you went to the museum, you looked at it, and you went home and tried to remember it. I mean, it wasn't, so people were attending museums paper, but there wasn't the availability of having prints of these paintings on your own walls. During the first part of his career, I'd see him jumping around, but somehow I'll get back to it. First part of his career, he was painting and winning many awards, and it was World War I began. People were very, very unsettled in their life and fearing for what was going to happen to the world. And he came up with these, I think, in those periods. His interiors, there's another one called South Room Green Street, which is the house they had in Philadelphia, with my Aunt Tana standing reading a letter, and the sunlight's coming through her hair, and my grandmother sitting in a chair, and they're not in connection with each other, they're not looking at each other, they're not speaking, but there's this calm serenity about it. This was his way of saying, this is how life is supposed to be. And so he became extremely popular. These were, in some way, helping people to say yes. Even if their lives were never like that, they were saying, yes, that's what my life should be like. This is peace, this is harmony. His reputation grew and grew until he got up into World War II. Many people were coming from Europe, from the horrible things that were going on there. Many of them were artists, and they began painting in a way to express themselves in a whole different way. And my grandfather's paintings became known as pretty and, you know, just not really art. So things went quiet for a very long time, and he got depressed. I think he was depressed. Plus his health was bad, and he devoted himself to doing etchings. In the winter would do etchings because he was a summer and spring painter. Redfield was a winter painter. In the winter months he would do his etchings and drawings and play chess with my grandmother. There was many feuds with that. This family, I'll tell you, I don't know, see I'm jumping around. We had two sports in this family. One was chess, which was a two-man sport, and sometimes there were onlookers, and most of the time you wanted to get out of the room where they were because they yell at each other. And then there was the croquet. Croquet was blood sport. I mean, everybody that was here we had to play croquet, and I mean, it didn't matter if you were a child. You know, they'd put your ball in the woods or it was all for the, you know, and there's a great story about that, which I will remember to tell you because it's too long for right now, but bring me back to the croquet game, okay? Don't forget. And so I just want to tell you a little bit more about his snobbish behavior. His belief in art was so ingrained in him. One time he had a wealthy woman had come up to the Cuttalossa. He was selling his things himself, and she made an appointment and went through the studio. I mean, the paintings were stacked. Where that looks like a pew or something. Well, the big canvases were stacked there, and as little kids, we would come running in here in our bare feet and pull them out and look at them and shove them back and pull. Which one do you like? Which one do you like? Pull another one out. And I mean, you see museum people now with purple gloves, you know, and lift it up. And, the first time I loaned a big painting to the Michener, which was the first show the Michener ever had. This was way back before Bruce Katzeff's time. Two secretaries showed up with a van. They hadn't even taken the back seats out. They took this painting canvas, which was 50 by 60 inches, not counting the frame. So it was like 58 by 68, and slid it through the back door down. And I'm like, oh, maybe I better go in and get a bedspread to put over it, because, and then I got in my car and filed it because I wasn't sure this was a good idea. But anyway, it made it there fine, and they brought it back somehow. I don't know. But today they are very, I mean, top museum standards. But that was very. Anyway, so he had the three paintings here. Those were her selections, and she said, "Well, I really like this one, but I just painted my living room, and I think I like this one." She didn't get a painting. Didn't sell her painting. So that's, I mean, I know, yeah. Let me just check my little cheat sheet here. Oh, I got some more stories to tell you. Okay. Oh, just to round up about the time I spent with him here. Another one of his techniques was not to compliment you. That summer, I was just glad he didn't, you know, throw me out of the studio from some of the stories I heard. 7 years ago, the catalog raisonné, which I told you earlier, was completed. It took 20 years of research. Just before that was printed, Lance Humphreys, the research person who also curated the exhibition, called me, and he had found some letters at the Pennsylvania Academy, and he had gone through all the paperwork of any receipt or letter or personal note that Granson had written or was written to him. And he found a letter that Garber had written to Joe Frazier, who was at that time the head of the Academy. In it, in the opening part of the letter, says, "Dear Frazier, I've had John's eldest with me this summer to study, and she's doing wonderfully well." I never knew. It was 7 years ago, and everybody's dead in my family, and I got this, you know, note from the past. I couldn't keep it, but he faxed it to me. I mean, so I put it on the computer and blew it and it's on my refrigerator. Anyway, I'm going to let you walk around and have a little something to drink, and then we'll pick up, because there's so many stories. I just don't want your little seats to get tired. So why don't you get up and move? You're doing great. I do wonder.